From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Anne-Marie Horduran, I'm Joe Matthew.
The Fed makes its move, raising rates another quarter point amid growing angst over the debt ceiling.
We'd be in uncharted territory, and the consequences to the U.S. economy would be highly uncertain and could be quite averse.
We'll analyze the Fed's move and what it means for the debt ceiling fight with American Action Forum President Douglas Holtz-Eakin.
Democratic lawmakers plant a new flag in the ongoing competition with China, announcing plans to craft a bipartisan bill to limit Beijing's access to technology, foreign investment, and more.
And Russia claims Ukrainian forces launched a drone attack on the Kremlin last night. Will there be an escalation in hostilities in response? We'll speak with former senior director of the National Security Council, Daniel Freed. Joe, what a 24 hours it's been.
Once again.
And we're coming into this 5 o'clock hour after markets trading. The Fed, one and done, as we expected. They're worried about credit conditions. And yet, at the moment, we have PacWest sinking 34% on reports to look at strategic options. It wants to be bought out.
It's been down even more than that. In fact, down over 40% now. This is moving really quickly here. To think that that extra layer to the story was added since the news conference with Jay Powell just reminds us of how quickly these stories are moving here.
Yeah, absolutely. And the financial community is all eyes at the moment, especially today, has been on Washington. For more about that, joining us around the table is Bloomberg's Nancy Cook and, of course, economic editor Michael McKee. Mike, let's start with you. You were in the room with the Fed Chair Jay Powell. How disturbing is it for him, do you think, that after all of this, there's going to be potentially another bank failure in the United States?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if he walked into the room knowing that PacWest was in big trouble. They've been trading down for weeks, and today trading down particularly hard after doing it yesterday. I mean, I'm looking right now, down 54% today, almost 55%. They've lost more than half their market cap. There's not much left there. So the Fed would have been aware of the problems and issues there. It's not a big bank as these banks go, but it is just a sign that some of the issues that have happened, that have come up, are still with us, and they know that that's going to take a while to work out.
I want to talk to you more about the Fed decision today and what we learned in the news conference. But Nancy, look, the word from the administration has been consistent, sound and resilient. There's nothing to worry about here. Looks like we have another bank to worry about, though. How does that narrative hold up in the face of reality?
Well, I think that it really presents a problem for the administration, particularly since we saw President Biden announce his reelection last year. I mean, the biggest thing that could threaten him politically would be for the country to fall into a recession. And I think the combination of inflation and just ongoing bank failures definitely give voters a lot of concern about the economy. And as we've seen in election after election, voters really vote with their pocketbooks.
Yeah, what do you think the administration is going to do if there is another bank failure? I mean, to McKee's point, likely that obviously this was on the horizon, but to Joe's point, they keep talking about this sound and resilience, but how is it sound and resilient when every day there's either on the brink or at the brink of a bank failing?
Well, I think that the other option that they've been trying to do is really call out Republicans for loosening the restrictions on bank regulations under the Trump administration. And I think that that's the other political play that we'll continue to see them try to make. But the fact of the matter is President Biden has been in the White House for 2 years. Do you know what I mean? Whoever is the incumbent really owns the state of the economy. And as these things snowball, I think it's a real political risk for him.
Michael, the Federal Reserve today suggesting that no recession is expected. Jay Powell still sees a soft landing, I guess, here in the cards, but also no interest rate cuts as the market has been betting here. And you're the only reporter who asked about this today, which I find remarkable. No real forecast to base that on, though. So what's the Fed looking at the next 6 weeks?
Well, the forecast seems to be that the inflation rate is going to go down very slowly. So they don't think they are going to be cutting rates because they're focused on inflation. The markets seem to think that inflation will fall much more quickly either because the Fed is successful or because we go into recession, and the Fed will be cutting interest rates. I found it fascinating that after Powell's news conference, when he said we're not going to cut rates, the market's priced in even more rate cuts. So it's going to be a face-off for the next couple of months, I think, between the Fed and the markets. They're going to go back and forth over this.
As Joe said, you were the only one to ask about these rate cuts. And let's take a listen to what the Fed chair had to say in response to Mr. Michael McKee.
We on the committee have a view that inflation is going to come down, not so quickly, but it'll take some time. And in that world, if that forecast is broadly right, it would not be appropriate to cut rates, and we won't cut rates.
That was the Fed chair, Jay Powell, at the press conference earlier today. Mike, you were in the room. He was answering your question. But didn't you also have a follow-up to that you also wanted to ask?
Well, I was curious. I didn't get a chance to ask him how divided the committee might be, because we're at the median dot now. This was the consensus prediction from Fed officials as to where they would be at the end of the year. But 7 members had said they want to go farther than that. And then we have some like Austin Goolsbee and others who say we may need to be lower than that. Is there real division among the Fed officials? But unfortunately, that'll have to wait till next time.
Yeah, well, you know, a lot of Democrats were asking the Fed not to do this. We talked to one of them yesterday, Congressman Brendan Boyle. They actually sent a letter. Elizabeth Warren tweeting today that they need to stop these Fed rate hikes for the sake of the job market. The White House won't go near this with a 10-foot pole. They defer to the Fed, independent Fed. Here's the tweet from Elizabeth Warren, risking pushing our economy into a recession. How does the White House manage this going forward?
Well, I think that privately, White House officials would like the Fed to stop raising interest rates, but they're so cautious after President Trump, called out Powell, time and time again. They want to appear like they are respecting independent institutions.
Well, they wish no more hikes were coming.
Right, but privately, they don't want more hikes because, as we've talked about, they're really worried about the labor market, they're worried about recession, and they're worried about what that will mean politically for Democrats heading into a very tough Senate map in 2024 and a presidential election.
We haven't even discussed the other big topic in the room today at the Fed, and that was, of course, the debt ceiling. Jay Powell got a number of questions about this. Take a listen to what he had to say.
It's essential that the debt ceiling be raised in a timely way so that the U.S. government can pay all of its bills when they're due. A failure to do that would be unprecedented. We'd be in uncharted territory, and the consequences to the U.S. economy would be highly uncertain and could be quite averse.
Uncharted territory. That's what Jay Powell's calling it. What's the answer going to be from Congress? He was very careful not to be political about it. He basically said it's all of your problems, but not Democrats or Republicans, just a collective.
Well, what we've seen now is basically, the Republicans passed a bill, the House Republicans, that outlined what they wanted in exchange for raising the debt ceiling. Now the next thing on the calendar is May 9th. The congressional leaders are going to go to the White House to meet with President Biden. What we're seeing ahead of that is both parties are trying to blame the other one ahead of that to appear like they have the most leverage, appear like they have the business community on their side, and sort of see who blinks. The signals from the White House so far is that the president is expecting to sort of lecture House Speaker McCarthy, not really negotiate with him. And I think that that's what we're expecting to see.
Lawmakers are part of Jay Powell's constituency, of course, and he's known, for staying in touch with leaders on Capitol Hill. Are they in touch on the debt ceiling? Is he privately urging them to get this done?
I don't know if he's taking a stance as urging them to do it other than his public comments. But I'm sure he's talking to them about it. You remember back in 2011, before he joined the Fed, when we went through a debt ceiling crisis, he was working at the nonpartisan I can't remember the name of the group he was with, but basically he was walking around Capitol Hill briefing congressmen and senators on the impact of the debt ceiling and why they needed to pass it. And it was one of the reasons that he ended up getting picked by President Obama to join the Fed, was because he had done all this work on the debt ceiling. But this is something that, it's so unthinkable that any Fed official is going to be saying the same thing. That it's not going to.
But do you think his words today caused any sense of urgency?
Oh, no.
On Capitol Hill?
Oh, no. I think.
Do you think so, Nancy?
I agree. I mean, we also saw the Treasury Secretary yesterday sort of put a date on it and say they need to do this by June 1. And usually the only way anything gets done in Washington is when people have a deadline. And even with her sort of firm deadline yesterday, there still doesn't seem to be a tremendous amount of urgency.
There's a law in Washington, according to Chris Kruger of Cowan, that when you get to the edge of a cliff, build more land. I think there's no question that what's going to happen is we're going to get a debt ceiling extension, a temporary one, probably tied to September 30th, the end of the fiscal year, so that we can have a debt ceiling crisis and a government shutdown crisis at the same time. But this will give them more time to yell at each other for a while and then finally get into the process of trying to come up with a deal.
Smart take from our reporter roundtable, Nancy Cook and Michael McKee. We thank you, as always, for the time here. Coming up on Balance of Power, the latest on the state of the war in Ukraine. Former National Security Council Senior Director Daniel Fried is back with us to discuss next on Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV. Ukrainian President Zelenskyy denying Russian allegations today that his government organized an attack on Putin's residence in the Kremlin, as you can see here, by a pair of drones. Pretty remarkable footage here. Daniel Fried, the former director of the National Security Council and former ambassador to Poland, joins us now to discuss. Mr. Ambassador, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming back to talk to us here at Bloomberg. Who do you believe?
I certainly don't believe the Russians. We don't know whether the drone attacks or what we saw over the Kremlin was a Ukrainian drone attack or a Russian false flag operation or something else. We simply don't know. We can be pretty confident, though, that this was not a Ukrainian attempt to assassinate Vladimir Putin. For one thing, it occurred at 2:30 in the morning in Moscow time, and Putin doesn't spend the night in the Kremlin very much, if at all. It's possible it was a Ukrainian audacious drone attack that succeeded, but it's also possible that the Russians organized this to change the subject and give them an excuse to go attack some new target in Kyiv. The Russians responded to this attack almost immediately and with immediate threats to go after Ukrainian targets. And former President Medvedev even said that the only solution for Russia was to kill Zelenskyy. So they're the ones talking about assassinating political leaders. In any event, it does.
No, say that's it's incredibly dangerous and sinister language. I want you to hear what Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy said earlier today when he was asked about this drone alleged attack. Take a listen.
We don't attack Putin or Moscow. We fight on our territory. We are defending our villages and cities. We don't have, enough weapon for this.
President Zelenskyy also bringing up another important issue that he wants to make with the West was we don't even have enough weapons for this. Would that be a fair assessment?
It would be fair to say that the Ukrainians did not set out to assassinate Putin. It's also fair to say that Russia has been attacking Ukrainian cities, killing civilians, indiscriminately targeting apartments, residential areas for over a year. So the Ukrainians would be within their rights to go after military targets in Russia. But if Zelenskyy has said they did not do so, we ought to give his word more weight than we give that of various Kremlin spokesmen. Still, neither I nor people in the administration whom I've spoken with can say for sure what the source of these attacks were. We just don't know.
Okay. Well, Ambassador, certainly nothing's been holding back the Russians from attacking Kyiv, civilian targets in Kyiv for the last year and change. Have they not been trying to also specifically target President Zelensky? Has his name not already been on a list? He says his life has been in threat for this whole time. So what actually changes here?
The Russians possibly trying to change the subject after their military lack of success in Ukraine. Their failure to capture Bakhmut after months and months of effort and enormous casualties. The Russians may be trying to change the subject, to escalate tensions, to get us all talking about some new escalation, which is exactly what we're doing. Yeah. The Russians on the eve, or not on the eve, but a week before their May 9th World War II victory celebrations, may be trying to set the stage for some audacious act of violence on their part to try to show their people that they're not losing the war. I suspect that's what's going on. But I don't want to say for sure who, where those drones came from, if in fact they were indeed drones and not some other Kremlin game.
Well, the White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, also didn't want to speculate from the podium. Take a listen.
The United States is certainly not encouraging, enabling Ukraine to strike beyond its borders. We've been very clear from here about that. But again, I don't want to get into speculation from here about the authenticity of this report. So I'm just not going to speculate from here.
Right.
Ambassador, right. Moscow Victory Day is very soon, and Putin really relishes every year in these moments. Do you think there's any coincidence in the timing of this?
Well, I share your implied suspicion that there is a relationship. The Russians don't have a victory over Ukraine to celebrate this year. Putin basically promised his people that they would be in Kyiv well over a year ago, that his operation would succeed within a few days. It hasn't. It has turned into a war that Putin can't seem to win and he can't seem to get out of. So it seems like Putin to try to change the subject by setting the stage for him to blow up something and claim a victory. And yes, in answer to your earlier question, the Russians have tried to kill President Zelensky and basically destroy the Ukrainian government leadership since the very beginning of the war. They make a lot of threats, and they've been unable to make good on their promises of an easy victory. So it strikes me more likely than not that this is an effort by the Russians to try to set the stage for some spectacular attack in Ukraine. But the White House is right to be cautious, and my sources inside the administration are similarly cautious. I don't think they know, and I think they're right not to speculate.
Ambassador, this comes just a day after the White House, also maybe not such a coincidence, the White House estimated Russia's military has suffered 100,000 casualties in just the last 5 months of fighting. Russia, again, disagrees with the United States' take on this. Do you believe that number?
Yes. I think the evidence shows that the Russian military, quite possibly desperate to give Putin a victory that he is demanding through thousands and thousands of soldiers in basically suicide attacks in Bakhmut, the Ukrainian city they've been trying to capture, and in other attacks, desperately trying to show a win for their president. And I think the U.S. estimates tend to be accurate. Now, I don't know the ratio of Russian to Ukrainian casualties, but the evidence suggests that the Russians are suffering far, far more casualties than the Ukrainians. And it is quite possible that the Russian military commanders were under orders to show a victory at all costs and were being desperate. Well, desperation did not seem to bring victory. And now the momentum in the battle may be shifting over to the Ukrainians. We shall see.
Ambassador, thank you so much for your time. Of course, that's the former ambassador to Poland, Daniel Fried. As we head to break, just got a quick check on what is going on with PacWest. It's looking at strategic options, potentially a sale. This is another day, another bank is falling, and it's down close to 55% in aftermarket trading. Kaylee Lyons will be back with a report after this break. This is Balance of Power.
There were three large banks, really, from the very beginning that were at the heart of the stress that we saw in early March, the severe period of stress. Those have now all been resolved. I think that the resolution and sale of First Republic kind of draws a line under that period of, is an important step toward drawing a line under that period of severe stress.
Of course, Fed Chair Jerome Powell earlier today, and now yet another bank is teetering as we speak. Bloomberg's Kay Lyons is here with more on the breaking news on PacWest. I mean, it's just astonishing what the day has become. Jay Powell comes out, he cuts rates again, and yet we have another bank failing, although the government continues to tell us banks are resilient and sound.
Yeah, that has been the line, and yet market participants have been watching PacWest and others for days and weeks now to look and see if another shoe drops after the bank failures we already had seen. Now, PacWest at the moment in after-hours trading down 53%. That adds on to 42% drop over just the last 5 trading days, and this is after a great Bloomberg scoop from our colleague Matthew Monks that is reporting that this bank is considering a range of strategic options, including a sale, though he indicates via sources familiar with the matter that a sale has been hindered because there aren't many potential buyers that are interested in the whole bank. We have seen this playbook before, guys. They know they can get a good deal if the FDIC has to come in and seek receivership. So they are also considering a breakup or a capital raise. But this just really serves to underscore the lingering concern there is out there in the market about the health of some of these regional banks amid deposit flight issues, interest rate risk as well. And those interest rates, of course, as Anne Marie alluded to, got higher today.
So are we at the point where the market is picking losers here? That Wall Street says this is the next bank and then everything else happens?
Well, we've seen this happen repeatedly. It happened with Silicon Valley Bank and First Republic. Market participants lose faith in a stock, and that can kind of contribute to the crisis of confidence that ultimately leads to the failure of a bank. It'll be really interesting to see how this is addressed in the Senate Banking Committee tomorrow, which is holding a hearing on holding bank executives accountable for those failures. This is a story that's changing fast.
Lots to look forward to tomorrow. Again, Bloomberg's Kaylee Lyons, thank you. Coming up, a rate hike from the Fed and a touch of optimism from Chair Jay Powell.
The case of avoiding a recession is, in my view, more likely than that of having a recession.
More on the debt ceiling, the state of the economy next with Douglas Holtz-Eakin on Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg.
No one should assume that the Fed can protect the economy from the potential, short and long-term effects of a failure to pay our bills on time. It would be so uncertain that it's just as important that we never get to a place where we're actually talking about or even having a situation where the U.S. government's not paying its bills.
Fed Chair Jay Powell weighing in on the debt ceiling today on the heels of another rate hike. And joining us today for more on this and a few other stories we're following, including this PacWest implosion tonight, Douglas Holtz-Eakin, American Action Forum president, former Council of Economic Advisors chief economist. It's great to see you, Douglas. Thank you for coming in today. As we consider the way forward here, knowing that there's a meeting set at the White House for next Tuesday, does that give you more hope than you had, say, a couple days ago before we knew that at least all parties would be coming to the table?
Well, there is some good news here. There's a meeting scheduled, and there's a bill that's passed the House, and those are necessary steps for getting this done. But they're still very dug in. The White House insists that only a debt limit, is the answer, and that won't pass the Senate. The House has passed its bill. That won't pass the Senate. And that suggests they have to get to some other place. And there's been no real evidence of anyone willing to shift their position. And so the question becomes, how do you craft something bipartisan that can pass the House, the Senate, and be signed by the president? And they don't have a roadmap at the moment, and that's concerning because the clock is ticking.
Yeah, the clock is ticking. By our count, when the president, the House, and the Senate are all here in Washington, D.C. before June 1st, it's only 7 days, a week. That's it, unless they start changing some schedules. Do you think this is now the case of just they're going to kick the can down the road so they can actually do some proper negotiating?
I have felt for a while that this seems a lot like 2011, where both sides are dug in, the brinksmanship is real, and no one changes their position until there's an event that causes some pain and forces them to. In 2011, that was things like a downgrade, a lot of market volatility, interest rate movements. It feels like that's what it would take again. And so probably the most likely scenario is they stay locked down. They don't make any progress. Markets start to show some real volatility, and they get nervous and pass a short-term extension and then get serious about reaching a deal this summer. I don't see any evidence of them simply coming to a table and finding an agreement.
Yeah. Well, you, of course, also ran the Congressional Budget Office earlier in your career, Doug. So you have a sense of the amount of work that needs to go into this. Let's say they do kick the can on the debt ceiling. There's a suspension that brings us to fall. And now both are being negotiated. Does that sound like a realistic proposition to you? And we've thrown regular order, I presume, out the window at this point. They're going to have to cut a deal one way or the other. I don't mean to start with the jokes at this point.
No, the idea was floated earlier this year to simply do a short-term extension to September 30th and have the funding deadline for the government coincide with the debt ceiling deadline. Weirdly, many people think that improves the chances of getting things done because you have more dimensions along which to deal. Right? It's not just up or down on the debt. You have other tools. So I'm not a professional politician. I've watched them for a long, long time, but politics is the art of getting to yes, and they know their conferences. They know what their bottom lines are, and they have a better sense of getting to yes. And I actually don't care how they get to yes, but they got to raise the debt ceiling and they got to fund the government. So we stay tuned.
Well, not only do they have to raise the debt ceiling, but there's going to be a lot more issues pertaining to the White House and to Congress, because we have in front of our eyes yet again another bank that's struggling. PacWest, looking for strategic options, wants to be bought. Today, Jay Powell said, I don't have an agenda to further consolidate banks. It's healthy to have a range of different banks. But all of these banks have been dealing with the same underlying issue, which is the fact that the Fed raised interest rates very aggressively and very fast. Was the Fed in error here in terms of making sure that they were communicating with these banks on and supervising them correctly on what they were preparing to do in the interest rate environment?
It's a really good question. I mean, I don't think you can accuse the Fed of failing to communicate its plans. I mean, Chairman Powell in particular said repeatedly that they were going to move monetary policy to a restrictive position, and the rate increases kept coming. And we saw lots of periods where markets didn't believe them, and they just had to come into line. So I don't think the communication's a failure. I'm shocked that the management of the banks hasn't been better, but I'm comparably shocked that the supervision didn't pick this up and say, hey, you got to get your house in order. You know, we have a real maturity mismatch problem, and it's going to hurt you. I believe the Fed thought that they could deal with the inflation using their interest rate and portfolio moves, and they could deal with the banks using a liquidity facility, which they set up, and that this was largely a liquidity problem in the aftermath of the sort of unique circumstances of Silicon Valley Bank. I now think that's not probably the case, that there's some genuine solvency problems out there. And that's a horse of a different color. The Fed can't really do anything about that. And the supervision better identify these banks early, start looking for private sector solutions early, and not have a bunch of weekend meetings where the government's trying to invent procedures to save banks. That's the worst case scenario.
Well, so that said, I realize a lot of this has to do with psychology, Doug, but the administration has to choose its words carefully. Do they need to stop saying that the banking system is sound and resilient, particularly if we have another here in the case of PacWest?
The banking system is sound and resilient. But they need to think about their message.
Wait a minute.
You don't want to send the president up.
PacWest is failing in front of our eyes. It's down 55%. This would be, by my count, the fifth U.S. bank, if it was to go into receivership, the fifth U.S. bank in a matter of months to fail.
Yeah, that's right. And, firms fail in the United States. In every other industry, we don't have a extended coverage of it because it is the norm. We have really turned banks into something which are way too fragile and where we don't use normal procedures to resolve them. But there's no Chapter 7, no Chapter 11, no normal reorganization as you would with any other entity in the U.S. economy. So we've created this problem. So now they need to do better supervision so that they get ahead of it. And I think the Fed really was at fault with Silicon Valley Bank and the others. And they need to start, encouraging them to find private sector partners if they've got solvency problems. And some of them do.
Well, if they can't find those partners, then, Doug, should they let PacWest fail?
I would say yes, but that will not happen. There will not be just letting a bank fail. No politician is going to take that risk. They're all incredibly risk averse. The president is yeah. It's not a fault. That's just a reality. And so,
sure,
what's amazing is we set up procedures in Dodd-Frank for resolving banks. We have orderly liquidation authorities that have never been used. Despite all of the work that has gone into monitoring the banking sector, we still find ourselves in this position. And I think that tells you something about the supervisory regime. It's not realistic, and it's not doing its job.
Thanks so much for joining us. American Action Forum President Douglas Holtz-Eakin there. We really appreciate your time. He says they're sound and resilient. It's just ironic given the fact that we have bank after bank either struggling or failing. And what president has the U.S. government prepared now? Because once these banks go into receivership, that's when individuals are interested in wanting to buy it.
That's correct, yes. And we don't know exactly how this is going to end. We should make clear with PacWest. We're just reading what's happening in the after-hours session, and it is deeply negative right now.
And they're looking for these strategic options.
Absolutely
they know
right.
They're in trouble.
That's a story you'll read about on the terminal.
What's interesting is this bank is based in Beverly Hills. And, of course, that's where all the financiers are this
conference
week.
Going on out there right now. So as they are gathered there, whining and dining, this is happening in their backyard.
And pretty tremendous day when you have the Fed hiking rates again. All right, coming at the program, switching gears, Donald Trump's lead in the polls over Florida Governor Ron DeSantis showing few signs of easing up. We'll break it down with our political panel next. From Washington, this is Balance of Power.
Now, keeping up to date with news from around the world, here's the first word. I'm John Hyland. Continuing to watch shares of regional bank PacWest sinking in after-hours trading and reports it's weighing strategic options, including a sale. The Beverly Hills-based bank has been working with a financial advisor and has also been considering a breakup or capital raise. This comes amid the collapse of three of its rival lenders. In Texas, law enforcement has arrested the man suspected of shooting 5 people in a neighborhood dispute. Authorities say Francisco Oropeza was found hiding in a closet underneath laundry. According to officials, neighbors complained to Oropeza and police Friday night that he was firing a gun in his yard. The FBI says he then entered their house and killed 5 people. For the second time in less than a week, Iranian forces have seized an oil tanker. According to the U.S. Navy, Iranian fast attack boats forced the Panama flagship to head towards Iran's territorial waters as it transitioned in the Strait of Hormuz. Last week, Iran's Navy seized a Marshall Island flag tanker in international waters. It's now being held at an Iranian airport. Saudi Arabia is reportedly preparing to offer soccer star Lionel Messi a $400 million annual contract to play with the Saudi Pro League this summer. That's according to The Telegraph. Such a deal would far exceed the more than $200 million agreement that Cristiano Ronaldo signed to play in Saudi Arabia until the summer of 2025. Messi was suspended on Tuesday by his current club for 2 weeks after the travel to Saudi Arabia without permission from the organization. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Originals. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm John Hyland, and this is Bloomberg.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV. The 2024 presidential race already taking shape 18 months before the contest. Recent polls showing Donald Trump leading Florida Governor Ron DeSantis by 30 percentage points. Joining us now around the table, our political panel, Roger Fisk, New Day Strategy founder and former aide to President Obama, and Doug Heye, former RNC communications director and Republican strategist on what more to expect. Yes, all have a laugh 18 months out. And we're really gearing up and talking about this election. But that's because, Doug, in your party, Trump just continues to batter anyone that is gaining any pace, even though today Chris Christie called him a, quote, child for fixating on the 2020 election.
Well, I think Chris Christie's probably right about that. And one thing that Chris Christie is very talented at is bursting balloons. But Donald Trump is of a mylar that's so thick that we don't know yet if his balloon can burst. He certainly can lose elections. We've learned that. But what we need to see is people standing toe-to-toe at some level with Donald Trump, whether that's at a debate, certainly questions about whether or not that's going to happen, even at the Ronald Reagan Library. So the first opportunity will be next week on CNN. Caitlin Collins is not somebody who shirks away from asking tough questions. She's going to try and pop a balloon or two.
I'm sure there's a joke here about a Chinese spy balloon, Roger. But Chris Christie says, obviously, he's afraid to get on the debate stage. Why would Donald Trump get on a debate stage? Would you?
First off, thank you so much for having me and having me here with Doug. I understand where the former president is coming from, because when things are trending in your direction like this, you really just don't want to change your trajectory at all. And if he gets indicted a few more times, I guess he'll be up to like 75 or 80%, given the bump that goes along with these kind of law enforcement situations.
The money is certainly commensurate.
And Chris Christie is kind of a Lindsey Graham character, which is he for so long has been swimming alongside Donald Trump that he can't define himself in any way other than by using Trump as a reflective surface, which I think is a devastating commentary on the foundation of the candidacy he's trying to put together.
But also it's a way to get noticed, right? More people are going to write it up if he's attacking him. I want to shift gears a little bit here. We're talking about 2024. We know the Republicans are going to want to use the economy against Biden. And yet today, higher interest rates once again from the Fed. On the same day, PacWest, another regional bank, down 55%, looking for options. How difficult is this going to be to message when you have a number of bank failures in months, still high inflation, and everyone thinking potentially recession because of how high rates are going?
Absolutely. The biggest danger, especially to an incumbent, is when a constellation of circumstances kind of coalesce in the last 30 days or so before an election, because they tend to validate each other in a lot of ways. But I'm thinking back, unfortunately, I remember a lot of this stuff. May of 2019, the Trump economy created 75,000 jobs, which is pathetic by any measurement. March of 2019 was the largest single-month growth of our nation's deficit, $235 billion. In February of 2019, the Trump economy created 40,000 jobs, which is barely even a statistical crumb. So when you start to look at apples and oranges and compare Biden job numbers versus Trump job numbers, which is really where the rubber meets the road in terms of like how people perceive the economy over their kitchen tables. Yeah. Biden might be in a stronger position than people might think right now.
Okay, so with the economy as a campaign issue, if you're Donald Trump, aren't you making an ad today about what bank is going to fail next?
That's a big part of your message. And the challenge, I think, for Biden is whenever he has good economic news, bad economic news is coming very quickly behind that. So we'll have a good jobs report, and then we'll hear about a bank failure. We'll get new interest rate numbers, which even if they're coming down, prices aren't coming down. It means that they're still continuing to rise. And so it's very difficult for Biden to message this. It's a constant mixed message in the media, and ultimately, it's about what voters feel and how they feel about the economy. And Biden's approval rating on the issue of the economy alone is under 40%. Those are numbers you shouldn't be able to win with. Also, when you have unemployment at as low as it is, you shouldn't be able to lose with those numbers. It's sort of unprecedented what we're seeing politically on the economy.
Another reason why floating the debt ceiling to next May is a non-starter for this White House.
Exactly. I want to ask about the debt ceiling. Both of you have a minute left. Should Biden have gotten in a room sooner, or did he play this correctly?
I think so far he has, but I think for the sake of the process and for the Biden brand, he needs to roll up his sleeves and get in that room and start working with people like not only just the speaker, but people like John Thune.
Look, Joe Biden says he's the great negotiator. All apologies to Donald Trump, but that's Biden's record in
man
Congress.
of the Senate.
And if he's not able to do so, it's going to be a big black mark for him. And Kevin McCarthy has very skillfully set this up as if Biden negotiates on anything, he can declare victory on that. That may allow them both to declare victory. Please pray to God that happens.
Imagine that world.
I can't wait for the dueling press conferences, the dueling statements.
We'll carry them all. Coming up, our political panel stays with us as we discuss President Biden's plan to send over 1,000 troops, more troops, I should say, to our southern border, a move his predecessor also tried. This is Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV.
While Republicans continue to push to lay off 2,000 Border Patrol agents, we are firing on all cylinders to prepare for the return to Title VIII on May 11th. We are doing everything that we can to put programs, to put processes in place to deal with what will occur at the border. Again, we need Congress to act.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre calling on Congress to help handle the crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border. Back with us, our political panel, Democratic strategist and Obama White House alum Roger Fisk, joined today by Republican strategist Doug Heye, former communications director for the RNC. Roger, 1,500 troops being deployed to the border here, and it's in advance of the lifting of COVID restrictions on May 11th. That's another big one for the White House next week. Not just the debt ceiling meeting, but what is going to happen. Well. Title 42 being lifted. The senator from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, today said all hell is going to break loose on that day. Is he right?
He could be. I normally believe that you have to focus on getting the policy right and then worry about the optics. But the border is one situation where you can never underestimate how much the optics need to drive that narrative. Because, for example, in the last segment, I talked about how incumbents need to make sure that they avoid a constellation of situations. And unfortunately, it's ingrained in our national conversation now that, right or wrong, the nexus of the immigration debate can overlap with a sense of increased crime rate, and that can become an extremely powerful centrifugal kind of force. So the Biden folks need to go straight at this with strong, muscular optics, in addition to trying to get a larger immigration fix. But how it looks is equally as important to how it works.
Well, how it looks to many progressives on the left, is he just taking a card out of the Trump playbook?
I think to a lot of them, yes. But Biden has to stem some of this problem because immigration is an issue that typically on a federal level benefits Republicans. And part of it is, as Roger was saying, these images that people see, it's where terms like invasion come from because it's what they see with their eyes on TV, whether that's accurate or not. That's how people feel.
Well, it's deeply also it's a humanitarian crisis.
It absolutely is. And this falls on Biden's watch. And what we've seen is we saw yet another disaster with evacuation in Sudan, which reminds us of Afghanistan. This is the kind of third leg of the stool on these kinds of crises that we see in front of us on visual images that Biden can't afford.
I talked earlier today with a Democratic congressman from Texas. His district touches the Rio Grande. It's Henry Cuellar, and he's been very critical of this administration, talking about the evolving approach here to border security. He talked about it earlier today on Bloomberg Sound on Bloomberg Radio. Take a listen.
You got to return people that don't belong here. And that's what's important. It's not only the funding, but it's also the right policy at the border. And I think the Biden administration is, without due respect, is finally doing the right thing after 2 years.
It sounds like the definition of asylum is also evolving here. Do you agree?
Yeah, I don't quote or agree with Henry Kissinger all that much, but you can't implement or pursue your vision of justice without some foundation of order, right? You can't be proactive in the policies that you want to enact unless there's some level of control of the situation. And both optically and in a lot of ways, in terms of the on-the-ground reality, the Biden folks need to just get very muscular and assertive about getting order over the situation, and then can layer onto that discussions of asylum and things like that.
Yeah.
But the optics of it are just incredibly important. I can't stress that enough.
Yeah, certainly are. All right, thank you so much for joining us. Roger Fisk, New Day strategy founder and former aide to President Obama, and of course, Doug Heye, former RNC communications director and Republican strategist. Joe, before we close out the show, we have to remember today is World Press Day, and it's an important moment. Yeah, Press Freedom Day. And it's an important moment because we do have an American journalist from the Wall Street Journal still in Russia, Evan Gershkovich.
Imagine what he is thinking right now as he sits in a Russian prison and his family waits to hear.
All right.
He's in our thoughts today. Check out the new Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online.
Thanks for joining us. See you tomorrow.